Imagine this, where you're standing at the mouth of a cave, alone. No city lights, no roads, no voices, just wind and stone. You take one step inside, your footsteps echo, the air changes, and suddenly time breaks. You're not in 2026 anymore. You're in a world before history had a name, before books, before schools, before metal, before the wheel. Only darkness, only cold. And then, deep inside the cave, you see it, a figure on the wall. At first, it looks like a simple animal drawing, but as you move your torch closer, your chest tightens, because this is not just a drawing. It looks alive. A wild bull, massive, powerful, caught mid-motion, as if it's about to charge. You can almost feel its breath. Its muscles are shaded, its body has weight, its movement is real. And the first thought that hits your mind is, how is this possible? Then the next question, even more terrifying, who painted this? Because whoever did it was not supposed to exist. Not at that time, not in that world. So ask yourself, who was the first artist in human history? How could they draw with such precision, without modern tools, without light, without brushes, without education, without even a written language? And here's the strangest part. These paintings aren't near the cave entrance. They're deep, sometimes unbelievably deep, through narrow tunnels, crawling passages, choking darkness, places where you can barely breathe. So the question becomes larger. If this was just art, why risk death to paint it? Why go into the most dangerous part of the cave? Why not paint outside? Why hide it in the underworld? And then the numbers hit you. Some of these cave paintings are 17,000 years old. Some are even older, 30,000. Let that sink in. That is older than pyramids, older than Egypt, older than every empire you've ever heard of. Back then, humans had no cities, no kings, no libraries, no universities. So tell me, where did this skill come from? Who taught them proportion? Who taught them anatomy? Who taught them shadow and depth? And it gets even weirder. In some caves, animals are drawn with two heads or multiple legs. At first you think, maybe they made a mistake, but researchers believe it wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. It was a method, a way to show motion, like primitive animation, as if the artist was trying to show the animal running, charging, turning, moving. So now another impossible question appears. Did cinema begin inside caves? And then you notice something else. Next to animals, there are symbols, dots, lines, strange marks. Are they decoration or a message? Because some researchers claim these marks may represent stars, constellations, a sky map, which leads to the most shocking theory of all. What if these cave paintings weren't just art? What if they were science? What if the first artist was also the first astronomer? Because ancient people didn't just survive. They observed, they tracked seasons, they watched the heavens. So ask yourself, why did they look at the sky so closely? What were they trying to predict? What were they trying to remember? And now the final question, the one that makes your spine go cold. What if these caves were not shelters, but temples? What if painting was not decoration, but ritual? A spell, a prayer, a coded message carved into time to survive thousands of years until you and I finally found it? Because history begins with writing, but human consciousness begins with images. And maybe the first genius was not a king, not a warrior, not a priest. Maybe the first genius in history was the first person who entered the darkness and painted life onto stone and left one message behind. We were here. We saw the world. We remembered. In this video, you'll discover how these paintings were made, what pigments they used, why they look so realistic in the chilling mystery. What if they were mapping the sky? For a long time, we've been taught to imagine Stone Age humans in one simple way: a rough face, a heavy club, a mind obsessed only with survival. We picture them as half human, half beast. But the moment you step into a cave like Lascaux or Altamira, that entire image starts to collapse because the walls tell a different story. Not a story of ignorance, a story of intelligence, a story of observation, and honestly, a story of artistic genius. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If the people of the Stone Age were truly primitive, then their art should be primitive too. Crude scratches, random lines, childlike shapes. But that's not what we find. What we find is something far more shocking. We find animals drawn with correct proportions, accurate muscle structure, realistic movement, intentional composition, and even something that looks like perspective. And that immediately forces us to ask, how can a primitive mind produce advanced art? How can someone with no writing system create images that feel alive? Because these paintings aren't just symbols, they're observation-based realism. You can see it in the details. The curve of the horns, the tension in a running leg, the weight of a body mid-jump. Some horses are drawn with their heads tilted slightly forward, exactly like a horse in motion. Some bulls have that chest-forward pressure as if they're about to charge. This is not imagination. This is knowledge. And the biggest irony is, Stone Age people may have understood animals better than we do today because they lived beside them. They depended on them. They watched them for hours. They hunted them, tracked them, studied them. So ask yourself, who understands an animal more? A modern person watching wildlife documentaries? Or a hunter who follows its footprints for days? Exactly. And that is why these cave paintings feel so real. They were drawn by people who didn't guess what a bull looks like. They knew. Now let's go deeper, because the myth collapses even more when you learn this. Many paintings are found, not near the entrance, but deep inside the cave system, in narrow tunnels, in dark chambers, in places where oxygen is thin and fear is real. So here's the next question. If Stone Age humans were only thinking about food and shelter, why go deep underground to paint? Why risk your life? Why waste time? And this is where the narrative shifts. Cave art isn't just art, it's planning. To paint in those places, you need stable light-time organization tools, pigment preparation, and repeated effort. In other words, it required a system, and systems require intelligence. But it gets even more surprising, because some animals were painted in a way that suggests movement. You'll see a bison with multiple legs, a horse with overlapping heads. At first, you might think it's a mistake, but researchers believe something else. It might be an early attempt at showing motion, as if the artist wanted to say, this animal isn't still, it runs, which leads to an impossible thought. What if the first form of animation began inside caves? Then there are the pigments. Stone Age humans didn't have paint stores. They didn't have brushes, yet they created colors that still survive thousands of years later. They used red ochre, iron oxide, charcoal, clay minerals, and animal fat for binders. Sometimes they used their hands. Sometimes they used hollow bones to blow paint like a spray. Think about that. A prehistoric airbrush. That's not random survival behavior. That is creative engineering. And suddenly, the Stone Age savage becomes something else. A human with technology. A human with imagination. A human who was capable of abstraction and symbolism and storytelling. Because yes, these caves weren't museums. They were messages. And that's why this myth must die. Stone Age humans were not less human. They were fully human. They had emotion. They had memory. They had community. They had rituals. They had identity. They wanted to leave something behind. And the reason this shocks us is because we've been taught to believe civilization created intelligence. But what if it was the opposite? What if intelligence existed first and civilization was simply the result? So the next time someone says, they were primitive, you should ask, if they were primitive, why does their art still make modern people stop and stare in silence? Because deep down, we recognize something familiar in those paintings. Not the hand of an animal, but the mind of a person, just like us. a person who looked at the world and felt something so powerful, they needed to carve it into time. If someone told you the greatest art gallery on earth was not in Paris, Rome, or New York, but hidden underground, in a cold cave with no sunlight, you would probably laugh. And yet, that is exactly what Lascaux and Altamira are. Two prehistoric caves, two silent chambers of stone, and inside them, art so advanced that it forces historians to ask an uncomfortable question. Were prehistoric humans far more intelligent than we ever admitted? Let's start with Lascaux in France. This place is often called the Sistine Chapel of prehistory because the walls are covered with enormous animals, bulls, horses, deer, painted with a confidence that feels almost modern. Some figures are massive, some stretch for meters, and what's shocking is not only the size, but the precision. The proportions are correct. The bodies have weight, the muscles look tense, the animals feel like they're caught in the middle of life. But here's where the art becomes impossible. Many of the most famous paintings are not near the entrance. They're deeper, in chambers where light does not exist. So to paint here, prehistoric artists needed more than talent. They needed controlled lighting time and planning pigment preparation, and most importantly, a reason. Because nobody goes into darkness like that just to decorate. And this raises a serious question. Was Lascaux a home or a sacred place? Now move to Altamira in Spain. Altamira is even more surreal, because here the paintings are not just on walls, they're on the ceiling. Look up, and you see bison, huge, powerful bison, painted in rich reds and dark shadows. And the insane part is, they don't look flat. They look three-dimensional. They look like they're rising out of the stone. How? Because Altamira's artists were not simply painting on a surface. They were using the cave itself. They used natural rock bumps as the shoulders of a bison. Rock curves became muscle. Cracks became motion lines. In other words, they used the cave as a sculpted canvas. This is not primitive. This is genius. It is the same technique modern artists use today to create illusion, depth, and realism. So ask yourself, how did they think like that? And then comes the final shock. These animals weren't drawn randomly. They are arranged with balance, with spacing, with intention. It's composition, visual storytelling, a prehistoric cinematic frame. And that is why some researchers believe these caves were not just art sites, they were memory sites, ritual sites, places where people gathered to witness something, to perform something, to remember something. Because the truth is, Lascaux and Altamira don't simply show animals. They show the birth of the human mind, a moment in history where survival was no longer enough, and humans began to create meaning. And when you realize the age of these paintings, it becomes even more haunting. They are not 2,000 years old. They are not 5,000 years old. They are tens of thousands of years old, long before pyramids, long before kings, long before religion as we know it. And still, they remain, as if the first artists were saying, we were here. We saw beauty. We understood life. So now we return to the biggest question. How can Stone Age humans create art that still feels impossible today? Maybe the real mystery is not the cave, but us. Maybe we underestimated our ancestors. Maybe intelligence didn't begin with cities. Maybe it began with a torch in the silence of a cave where someone painted life onto stone and accidentally created immortality. There's another theory about cave paintings, and it's far more unsettling. Because what if these images were never meant to be art at all? What if they were something darker, something sacred, something dangerous? Think about where these paintings are found. Not outside, not in open spaces where people live, but deep underground, far past the cave entrance, beyond narrow tunnels, crawling passages, and cold chambers where light doesn't exist. Some caves require you to go so deep that you lose your sense of direction. Your breathing changes, your body feels trapped, and suddenly you realize something terrifying. This place was never meant for daily life. No one lives here, no one cooks here, no one sleeps here. So the question becomes chilling. Why would anyone travel this deep just to paint? Unless the location itself mattered, unless the cave was not a shelter, but a temple, a ritual chamber, a place where something happened. Because in many caves, the most impressive paintings appear in spaces that feel like ceremonial rooms, large chambers, echoing walls, dark silence. It's the kind of environment that changes your mind, makes you feel watched, makes you feel small, and prehistoric humans were not blind to that feeling. They lived in a world where nature was power. Storms could kill you, animals could destroy you, winter could erase entire groups. So ancient people didn't just fear the world, they believed it had spirits. And in many early cultures, images weren't decoration. They were tools. They were power. They were control. So imagine a Stone Age community. They're hungry. Winter is coming. Hunting decides life or death. One day the animals disappear. No tracks, no herd, no food, and the group begins to panic. So they do what humans have always done in fear. They search for meaning. They search for protection. They search for a way to bring the animals back. And this is where ritual begins. Some researchers believe cave paintings were part of hunting magic, a spiritual act meant to influence reality. The idea was simple but powerful. If you paint the animal, you capture its spirit. If you capture its spirit, you control its future. And if you control its future, the hunt will succeed. That's why in some caves we see marks over the paintings, scratches, cuts, even what appear to be spear impacts. At first it looks like damage, but what if it wasn't destruction? What if it was ritual? What if people gathered in these caves, stood before the painted animal, and symbolically hunted it? Striking the image, attacking the wall, as if they were rehearsing victory in the spiritual world before facing death in the real one. Because for them, the cave wasn't just underground, it was another dimension, a hidden world, a world where spirits lived. And when you enter deep cave chambers, even today, you feel it. You feel the silence press on your chest. You feel the darkness pull you in. Now imagine that, without modern knowledge, without flashlights, without science, only fire, only shadows, only fear. In that world, a cave could easily become holy, even terrifying, a doorway. And that might explain why these paintings were hidden. Not meant for everyone, not meant for casual viewing, meant for a small group, the chosen, the shamans, the ritual leaders, people who understood the symbols. Because in many caves, the art isn't only animals. It includes strange, abstract signs, handprints, dots and line symbols that repeat again and again, almost like a coded language. So ask yourself, what if these walls were not drawings, but spells? What if every image was part of a ritual script? And that would mean something huge. The first artists in history may have also been the first priests, the first spiritual leaders, the first humans who didn't just paint, but performed. And if that's true, then cave paintings are not just beautiful. They're haunting, because they show the moment humanity began to fight the unseen. The moment humans tried to influence reality through symbols, through images, through belief. So when you look at a painted bison deep in the darkness, maybe you're not looking at art. Maybe you're looking at a prayer, a fear, a survival spell carved into stone, thousands of years ago, by people desperate to control a world that could kill them at any moment.